Fantastic. So Bruce, are you going to get us started whenever you think the time is right? Or
I am prepared to do that. We're going to turn that over when we're ready to start. Prusha, I think, has some introductions she wants to do, but I'm certainly ready. So Arvind, we'll do what Keith calls the facilitator whisper here, and I will ask you out loud, are we ready to start? I see the head this way. I think that's yes. So welcome everyone to this event. I am Bruce Waltuck with the Plexus Institute, and it is my pleasure to be able to help facilitate and run some of the Zoom stuff for everybody and help everybody out. And I believe my colleague and friend Prusha from Plexus has got some introductions and is going to kick us off, and then it'll go over to Arvind and others.
Welcome everyone. This is Plexus Conversations, and our topic today is vital capacity and the prospects for thriving together. And we have a terrific assortment of guests, and you can see their bios on the screen. Bobby Milstein, Gary Gunderson, Dora Bahia, and you can see their brief bios on the screen, and you can see more at the Plexus webpage, plexusinstitute.org. And I see these are brief bios, and we're going to turn it over to Arvind Singhal, who's a professor at the University of Texas, and he has international appointments as well. And he's a veteran of positive deviance and liberating structures and entertainment education. And he's going to be our facilitator and moderator. So thank you, Arvind.
All right. Thank you, Bruce and Prusha, and greetings to all from New Delhi. As many of you know, a city in some anguish, in a country that is in deep, deep pain. Every time the phone rings, it's an obituary or news of somebody in the hospital. So please keep sending all those love and compassionate thoughts our way over the airwaves. And I know there are some of my friends here who have joined from New Delhi. There are some bios that are not on the chat, and we have colleagues like Larry McAvoy, Jim Cochran, Ella Auchincloss. Ella, did I say
right.
that?
That was on the first try. Yes,
Oh,
you can go by my maiden name too, Davila, but most people have more trouble with that than the other.
And so I guess when we come to Larry or Ella or Jim, maybe they would say a sentence or two about themselves. I think the participants would love to hear it from them. To set the frame, the container, the common mindset for this session, I'm gonna rely on three people. You cannot go wrong with Mother Teresa. So first I'm going to begin with Mother Teresa. She often used to say that none of us can do great things. None of us can do great things, but all of us, everywhere, at all times, can do small things with great love. And in some ways, that's a mindset that may help trigger some conversations today. I'm also relying on Parker Palmer. I owe him a deep intellectual debt. I read his book, The Courage to Teach, over a decade ago. It changed my life. Also his book, Let Your Life Speak, is very relevant to our conversation today. And some of his most recent work, especially his book, Healing the Heart of Democracy, is a very compelling argument in which he basically says that the quintessential question for us as humans today is not who we are, but whose we are. Not who we are, but whose we are. And Bobby, I think you may have a screen for the third quote that will help guide this conversation. And perhaps before that, I should say that no one has done more to create the conditions for us to thrive together and to deepen the practice of shared stewardship, something that we talk about, than the folks who will lead our conversation today. Their language, as you will hear, of shared stewardship looks at converting loss into renewal, adversity to strength. And to set the stage for that, here's this beautiful quote by Cynthia, and I'll let somebody else pronounce her last name, who says, "We are here in this womb, preparing for a new birth, to bring forth something that is alchemized and made real by our willingness to get into the dance. To enter the dance, we must sacrifice the known for the power to see." And I perhaps am inviting Bobby to the dance floor. We are going to engage in a framed interview. We think Bobby is a celebrity, so we call it a celebrity interview. I've learned this from Keith and Fisher, but I think, Bobby, as I invite you to the dance floor, you want to begin with us watching a video.
Yes, I think we'll let this set the frame for a discussion to come here. So let me play this. Just 2.5 minutes.
America is a land of innovators and hard workers. Even in the face of enormous odds and challenges, we find ways to lift up the strengths and capacities of our people. That resilience is what has made us strong, and that resilience is once again being tested. We've inherited both just and unjust legacies. Some inflict harm and perpetuate exclusion, others affirm dignity and grow inclusion. These inherited legacies shape the experience of our lives, and whether we are likely to suffer, struggle, or thrive. Today, America is crying out in pain. Toxic forces from a series of compounding crises are destroying lives and tearing our civic fabric. The unfinished ideals of America are now our responsibility. It is our sacred obligation as Americans to work toward a more perfect union and to spring forward, turning this adversity into advantage, to make economic and emotional recovery possible, to share stories of how families and neighbors are supporting one another, to elect empathic leadership on both sides of the aisle, and to make loud and resounding calls for equal justice. This is our defining moment. If we decide right now, together, that we will work from wherever we are to build, create, nurture, and sustain more just systems that advance our collective well-being, the future can come sooner than we think. Join us as we create new legacies predicated on one simple principle: all people and places thriving, no exceptions. Explore thriving.us to learn more about how your community can spring forward.
Thank you, Bobby, for that video. And clearly, while the reference is to the United States, but no matter where you are, whether in Germany or in France or the UK or El Paso, it speaks to our local, regional, national context. So Bobby, one of the things that I learned from you in the first call we had was this statement which I carry with me very close to my heart. And that is that we grow in the direction of the questions we ask. And so I'm going to ask you a few questions. And the first one is, we're talking about creating a new legacy of thriving together. And how did thriving together become such a prominent focus?
You know, that quote about we grow in the directions of the questions we ask, I learned it from Otto Scharmer, who many people in this call may also know. Otto is got a great deep understanding about how we become incredibly present to the circumstances that we're living in and still strive for transformative, pattern changing, results. And Otto's work in some ways fueled the aspiration for recognizing that even amidst adversity, even amid intense loss, would be the simplest way to name the nature of the renewal that we're looking for is the experience of thriving. I think a lot of us know what it means to thrive, and sadly, we know also what struggling and suffering looks like. And there is immense suffering happening on a global scale at the moment, but still it is possible to aspire to thrive. And that's a fine statement for us as individuals, but we also could recognize that we are unique people in a common world. And what does it mean to thrive together? To really recognize our plurality and expect all people in all places thriving to get springboard work that we had sent as some advanced reading. But for me, that notion of thriving together represents the kind of creative tension that says we live in a world right now with lots of people struggling and suffering. It was never really built for all of us to thrive together, but that is still a direction that we can head. And I'll put up a little quotation from Otto. As systems collapse, people rise. And with systems collapsing on a spectacular scale, that's the source of resilience that I think a lot of us are looking to see that even a few people with a just cause can transform these failing systems for the better. And the guiding North Star expectation of thriving together seems to carry a lot of that aspiration that we've been hearing over and over again in communities across the US and around the world.
So, Bobby, who is the we, the WE, that could achieve such a vast system change?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. It's hard sometimes to think about who does the work. When we talk about system change, we also need to recognize the hard work that it takes to break from business as usual and to do anything different. You started with the idea that we are not ourselves necessarily. We belong to others, right? We are part of a whose are we. One simple answer is whoever shows up to do this work can be part of that we. There's a set of vital conditions that we have been thinking about that animate this work, and at the center of them is that sense of belonging and civic muscle. That every human being, every living thing needs to feel that they're part of something bigger, right? We are interdependent in ways that are inescapable. And it's not just that we belong, but also we have things to bring, that there are talents and capacities and cultures that can be brought together to solve problems and to do work that none of us could do alone. And so that animating force of belonging and civic muscle then expresses itself in what we can do to shape a thriving natural world and to assure that all people have the basic needs for health and safety, clean air and clean water and nutritious food and routine healthcare and also humane housing and meaningful work and wealth, lifelong learning, reliable transportation. These are the basic conditions for allowing people to be able to participate and prosper and reach their full potential. And so those, the sort of work of springing forward, even amidst adversity, begins with every person who is able to expand the circle, who feels that they belong and really build the civic muscle to allow us to do work that none of us could do alone.
Bobby, for those of us who may say that it seems a little overwhelming to see one's own positionality in this vast shared work, how do we find the strength to become better stewards?
Yeah. Well, first, it's helpful to define the role, right? I mean, a lot of times it helps to have a word for things that, that sort of distinguish the mindsets and actions of people and organizations. Until we had the word entrepreneur, it wasn't so easy to see what was that special drive of creative energy that allowed people to be doing, remarkable things in business, or to migrate that word entrepreneur to social entrepreneur. But those people and organizations who see themselves immersed in a system that none of us fully understand, but still feel like we can be stewards of that system, right? I mean, our well-being depends on a system designed long ago that was never built for all to thrive. And yet we can still act with clarity and intentionality, with courage, to step up into roles as stewards. And so that's the beginning of this work, is to see, we have a working definition of this that sort of identifies the basic commonality for anybody who steps into this work as taking responsibility with others in order to create the conditions that everyone needs to thrive, and really beginning that work with clarity and solidarity with those who've been struggling and suffering. So anybody can be a steward. The issue is that this work of shared stewardship is so often unseen and uncelebrated. Our group at Rethink Health last year interviewed a number of people and organizations who fit this definition, who see themselves as stewards of systems that shape our lives together. And it becomes very clear that the people doing this work are impressive and yet still very disconnected and disparate and frankly outmatched by the forces of injustice. And so in many ways, this work is resting on our ability to come together and to step into roles that none of us were trained in or necessarily socialized in to play in our day jobs. But now our lives and our survival may turn on our ability to step into roles as effective stewards together, to expand those vital conditions and create circumstances where all people need to thrive. And that probably turns on as much internal capacities as it does on the work that we do in the outer world. How do we find the moral strength in ourselves? And how do we cultivate that sense of kindness and creativity in others and channel it toward this North Star expectation of people thriving? Was sort of the play on words for the title of this session, was how do we, if our goal is to establish vital conditions in the world to thrive, we're going to have to find the vital capacities in ourselves to do this work. And that's sort of the frontier of a lot of this inquiry that I hope we have today with the colleagues assembled here.
Well, let's invite to the dance floor to join in a fishbowl conversation three other colleagues who are stewards in the right sense of the word, those who use language to not just talk about the leading causes of death or mortality, but who insist on talking about the leading causes of life. Gary Gunderson, Dora Berea, a steward par excellence, has a very compelling story, and my dear friend Larry McAvoy, an emergency room physician who derives strength and inspiration from the ecology of biological systems and the natural world. So Bobby, you are, of course, invited to join the conversation as well. And I guess I turn it over to the four of you, and you may think of a talking stick and begin, whoever. Gary, perhaps, or maybe Dora, perhaps.
Gary, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I was afraid Dora would say that. So two thoughts occur to me. We've alluded to the body of thinking around leading causes of life. And Dr. Jim Cochran facilitates, nurtures this, and sort of is a steward of ideas. But the ideas, what are they for? And why all these words? There's so much work to do. People to vaccinate, people to feed, so much practical work to do. Why all the words? And what we find is the need to develop a stronger language that helps us become the people the world needs us to be. And in many cases, we have the same positional roles, but we find that many of the positions that we serve in were actually built around understandings of how important it was to fix something broken. And so we find ourselves in roles that actually don't fit the generative potentials, the vitalities we want to not just do, but live into. We want our lives to be about life. And very early on, when Jim and TC and I, Heather, others here, were working on that body of language and asking, what's it for? And why that language? The language helps us become deeply accountable for the vital capacities that we find turn out to be universal. They're even in me and us. they're actually there. And so we need this better language to help us be deeply accountable for those capacities. And the second reason we need life language, not just functional, professional, do a better job language, is Dr. Paul Lorienti pointed out that you don't really need life language unless life is complex. Well, it turns out it is complex. And part of why I was thrilled to see Bobby's graphic that emerged in this writing of the Thriving document was the first time I'd ever seen a screen that actually had a lot of stuff on it about adversity on the same screen with a lot of stuff on it about vitality and well-being. And so it was a complicated slide, but it didn't quite bump all the way over to what a Plexus crowd would say qualifies as complexity. And so what I'm eager for in this fishbowl in our conversation to help us be deeply accountable for playing roles that help us live out of our vital capacities, but do so fully conscious of the radical complexity of what we're engaging. That's really what I was so eager. And I said, we just got to do this on Plexus and in the Plexus tribe. They're the masters of complexity. Maybe we can bring this dialogue and the larger Plexus community can help us actually live into vital complexity.
All right, Gary, I'll take the talking stick now. Thank you for setting that up. I'm Dora Barula, and I want to share a little bit about my personal story because I think it sets the frame for my professional journey and perhaps a little bit of confusion that came to clarity much later on in my life. I actually received my degree in sport over 30 years ago, received my degree in sports medicine. And it was actually in Malibu, California. And I think about how different my life would be had I had Bobby Milstein as an influencer versus some of the other people that lived in Malibu at the time. It probably would have been very different because when you get your degree in sports medicine, you're a physician, you're a physical therapist, you're an exercise physiologist. And I just really felt that none of that, none of it felt right. And so my first job, I was the director of what we call preventive care and health education, which we refer to population health now, in a large managed service organization. So this is managed care in the early 90s in Southern California. And my job was to really look at what we call frequent utilizers of services. And it was one Friday afternoon that I received a call from a physician, just desperate, saying, we need a certified diabetes educator. I have a stat health education call. I need somebody to come out. And I didn't have any diabetes educators. They were all out in the field. So I said, I'll come out. And I went out, and as I was driving out to the physician's offices, I noticed that, the sidewalks were pretty much non-existent. There was fast food everywhere. There was really an environment in an ecosystem that wasn't very healthy. And as I sat down and talked to this 16-year-old who weighed 350 pounds, I had I think it was the food pyramid at that time, and I was going to tell her how, she should exercise and eat right. And as I sat down and I listened to her, noticed signals of physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. And that girl literally changed my life. It was, just really realizing that it needed so much more, that we really needed to look at this in terms of a shared ecosystem. We failed that young girl. Although she has forever been an influencer in her life, I've been on a journey. I was in my early 20s at the time. And in addition, I had, I married a paramedic who worked in the fire service. And so we've been married for 30 years. So we've had this dialogue of urgent services and the 911 calls to emergency department, and then, my view of public health and prevention. And so it really pushed me in this journey of what, whether it's vital conditions or ecosystems, of getting my degree in public health, which I didn't even really know what that was, a healthy communities movement, really looking at, how can we, with, municipalities, faith-based organizations, really come into a space where we can create healthier environments. Working with whole person care, really, looking at the whole picture. I also founded a not-for-profit, really looking at how can we have cross-sectoral partnerships. And, I've been amazed how continuously I've, really felt, just as Gary said, not adequate in what I'm trying to do. That I've been in the healthcare system the majority of my career. And so 10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, I met Gary. And when we, with creating the tribe of health systems learning group, which we now call stakeholder health. But what I found was, there is a tribe of health systems all across the country that really want to lean into this work. And so stakeholder health is, now a little bit over 10 years old. And it really is this loosely organized collaborative of more than 50 health systems, of people that really want to see the changes that I want to see, that they want to lean into and make healthcare more just, equitable, and effective. And how can we come together, to convene, to, support each other, to learn, to grow, and to, make things, in terms of the policies and what we're doing, fundamentally different. And so I have, about a year ago, Gary and Jerry Winslow, who was one of my mentors, asked if I would lead stakeholder health. And, as we really started having conversations again deeply with, the health systems, COVID hit. And, really see this moment of just immense suffering and loss. And getting back to, how can we have adversity into strength, saw this moment in time and this opportunity to really look at shared stewardship, that we, how can we come out of this creating that, that shared vision, the shared learnings, and do something fundamentally different. And I'm in my, second half of my career, and in January, I stepped away from the third largest health system in the country, to really lean into how can we do this differently? How can we work with other sectors? How can we really make a difference? So I'm here today to be a part of the fishbowl and to connect with all of you and to learn and thrive together. So I'll hand it over to my colleague, Larry.
Hey, Larry, we may need
little generative feedback from my friend Arvin. Thank you. That was the best thing I was going to say the whole time, and I have no idea what it was. I just want to thank Gary and Dora both, and everyone else on the call. one of the most wonderful things to me about the last 12 months, which is we've all had our stories of difficulty, as well as as Bobby talked about, Otto's comment that when systems collapse, people rise. I think we've seen both of those poles of that statement in the last 12 months. One of the things I found most invigorating, I don't like sitting in front of screens. I'm an emergency physician, and I'm used to roaming, right? Room to room, person to person. I'm used to roaming on land. And so I don't like to sit down, but when I open up these computer screens and see all the faces from so many different places and walks of life, and so many conversations, so many different languages, so many different areas of interest, I'm reminded of what I heard in that video, right? Which is that diversity is an advantage. I have a bias like everyone else does. I love that vital conditions model. As a person who's sort of steeped in biology, I might draw it a little bit differently, but that's a conversation about models somewhere. One of the things I'm interested in lately is this idea of infection. As I've worked in the emergency department and considered my life as a recovering healthcare CEO, and as a person who takes care of a piece of land that we agreed to steward 25 years ago when it was badly damaged from at least 80 years of abuse, and was on land that had been a mere 5-6 generations ago populated with bison and indigenous people. Certainly had a lot of room to think about these things, and probably like all of us have felt often very small and wondered, how does this happen? And along comes this coronavirus, right? As I like to say, no business plan, no name, no Twitter following, no social station, no spot in a box. It is literally anonymous nothing on a planet that has all of these, what do they say? Compounding crises. And yet it moves floridly, right? All across the earth. We ignore it, it moves. We panic, it moves. We argue, it moves. And so, I was thinking a bit lately, what are the pathogens that allow us to thrive together? What social infection actually allows us to become generative within each of us, between any of us, and across all of us? Is that possible? And the pandemic would suggest yes. I mean, we may not like the pandemic, right? It's a icky packet of RNA single strand virus or whatever its construct is, but it's unbelievable in its power to captivate our communities and to run through them and in them. And so is there a flip side is one of the things I've been thinking about. To Bobby's point about stewards are kind of rare and amazing and unseen and unnoticed, which is in a way what I like about stewards, right? We're not into ego. Stewards are people that are willing to be anonymous at one level. I remember years ago in the ER, a woman asked me as I was sewing her daughter's face. Her daughter had been jumped by a gang, and her daughter couldn't speak because her mouth was all hamburgered. And so her mother and I had an interesting conversation for about an hour while I was working on this young woman. And she told me her daughter was most worried about going to the prom, which is about 6 weeks later. And we were talking, she said, "Why do you do this?" And I remember asking her, like, "What do you mean? Why do I like to sew faces that are, lacerated and disfigured? Why do I do this job? Why this specialty? Why here? Why now?" Lovely woman. And she said, "Any of it, really. Like, why are you here?" And I remember, sort of in that nice fugue we get into when we're kind of on autopilot in one zone and our mind can wander freely. I told her, I said, really, someday, maybe next month at the prom, but someday this young person's going to get married or have a child or, celebrate her own child's wedding or whatever else. And in these moments, we would like her to be happy and not remember us, right? That her focus shouldn't be on us. And she ended up writing me a thank you note about 2.5 months later. She wrote a hand-drawn line drawing card. It was really nice. And she included a picture of her daughter with her prom date. And she said, "You know what? She didn't think a word. She didn't have a single thought about you all night long," which is great, right? So that to me is, those are the millions of tiny things that happen every single day. in stewardship, right? And so is it possible, I think, to create an infection of stewardship? I think we do have what I would call the dominion pathogen. I call it acquisition, convenience, and gratification, that when people orient around those things, we kind of create some bad stuff, right? Not that any of them are bad. If you don't have a shirt and you're cold, acquiring one is a good idea. So what does the stewardship pathogen look like? I think it's contribution, connection, and gratitude. And so as I look at biology, my native language, and I would argue the operating system of this planet and all living things, thriving together to me means finding a way for people to be able to relate anywhere, anytime, in an experience that they find, I would call it generative or fruitful. The language gets in our way here, to Gary's point. And in my whole life, I mean, whether people were beaten or shot, or they were in an organization where things weren't going well, the ability to relate is always in some way something people can migrate toward, they're attracted to, they come into it. You know, Keith and Fisher do this so well with the liberating structures, right? I mean, people want metrics, they want results, they want things to shift. But really, when you go down to the tiniest of things, if we redesign the way we relate, then thriving starts to happen at this infinitesimal thriving level. And somewhere in our brains, we go from acquisition, convenience, and gratification, a defensive, aggressive, power-seeking posture, to, you know what, I want to connect, I want to be part of, I want to listen, I want to understand. And that shift in our brain times 7 billion people, 5 minutes a day would be amazing, right? 10 minutes a day would be amazing times 2. So just some random thoughts. I'll go back on mute now.
Yeah, it's incredibly gratifying to hear the common thread across all 3 of those, which is in some ways large and small, a pivot from sort of recognizing the illusion of separateness and how it shows up in our work, to creating experiences of interdependence, right? Even small experiences of interdependence can draw more people into this work and cause us to you know, be participants and sort of partial co-creators of something bigger than ourselves. So that's at least one thing I heard from those 3 comments really quickly. But back to you, Arvin.
Terrific. Now we can keep going on. This is such a gift to have the likes of Gary and Dora and Larry and Bobby, and you know, these conversations can continue. However, I'd like to break out metaphorically of this fishbowl, and wanted to invite Ella as a sort of a, you know, call yourself a respondent, a reflector.
Thank you, everyone. Ella Auchincloss. I work with Bobby at Rethink Health and the Ripple Foundation. My title is the Director of Enterprise Innovation, but I sort of view my work as trying to operationalize a lot of the great ideas that Bobby and Gary and the likes of all of you come up with. A couple of things I heard that I'm reflecting on. I think a lot about complexity in our work, and I think a lot about how to design work for complexity. And I think a lot about how organizations are really designed for complicated work. And I also think about leadership and how leadership is designed for complicated work. And I think this idea of complexity requires a very different consciousness, human consciousness. And at the heart of it is around being able to hold 2 ideas as true at the same time. The idea of being able to navigate polarity, the idea of looking for that unitive field. So I really see the vital capacities of stewards and stewardship. I think what we need to start doing is naming those teachers, those bodhisattvas who've come to us throughout human history that have taught us what it means to go below and to hold 2 things as true at the same time. Because As long as we're not doing that, then we can't hold the enormity of what it means to be a steward. And so in our work, we think a lot about how do we, yes, design tools and methods and help them see the system in a different way. But Cynthia Bourgeot, the person who said the quote at the beginning of the session, to me is a wonderful example of a teacher who is really trying to build that vital capacity that enables us to hold these complex ideas at the same time, to be able to navigate those tensions. And I think the other thing I heard, it wasn't said, but Bobby reminded me that someone said at some point in the last 14 weird months that COVID-19 is if you want to learn about interdependence, if you want to teach about interdependence, you need to look no further than the story of this pandemic as the ultimate exercise in that. And so I'm a learner. I'm a student in interdependence like all of you. That's what I'll say for now. Arvind.
Thank you, Ella. I'm just pointing out that one of our super mentors, Henry Lipmanovich, is on the call. Welcome, Henry. And over to Jim now. Jim Cochran. Jim, I wonder if you want to reflect on what's been said, what you've heard, what you'd like to add.
Thank you, Arvind, and thank you everyone else. We'll keep it short. A couple of things, there's a lot of fascinating and rich stuff there that I don't want to simply reiterate. So let me add a couple of things that maybe haven't been emphasized, that have been hinted at. One is the common thread that you've seen, Bobby and Ella, you've just talked about, interdependence, dependence, coming together, connection, and so on, the way in which COVID has helped us understand that. There's a side to that that also enables us to treat our connections as exclusive, that can actually be harmful, that if you like, the critical question that seems to me we are needing to focus on just as strongly is toward what ends. We can do all of this to different kinds of ends, and they're not necessarily all about thriving. They're not necessarily thriving just for everyone, but only for some and harmful for others. In short, I would say that part of what we have to focus on, which is key to also what we talk about in the leading causes of life circles, is the vital capacities are not just skills or tools. They are actually what's at the core of what it means for us to be human, in our ability to look at actuality, to see new possibilities in it, and to transform that actuality in the process. That's an extraordinary set of capacities we have. It's why we have planes and computers and Zooms. But it's also why we can destroy this planet should we so choose. And it's also why we can decide to trash a constitution or tell the big lie or not to do so in order to bring certain people into our orbit. It's, in my reading, the particular kind of interdependence that's being promoted in the country you're in at the moment, Arvind, by the Prime Minister, is a highly destructive form. It's certainly drawing a lot of people, but that doesn't mean it's thriving. I don't want to focus on the negative. What I'm really trying to deal with is to say that these capacities to transform both nature, which is partly why we are able to deal with COVID and through vaccines that were almost unthinkable even a year ago. We are also able to transform our relations with each others. And we can do so. Nothing we have built together is not being done in that way. Nothing we do together has not been done by people rising when systems collapse and building new systems, whether it's on a small scale or a large scale. The critical issue is towards what ends, for whom, how inclusive and how exclusive, including nature.
Jim, thank you. We, of course, want to hear from you as well. And so the next part of our conversation will put you in small little breakout rooms. And Bruce, thank you for your willingness to help us out with that. So for the next 5 minutes or so, you would find yourself in a group of 4. And you can roughly decide how much time you'd have. But we'd love to hear from you. And the invitation to you is the following. What do you wish to be a steward of? What are you most passionate about? My son, for instance, who's in Dallas, is planning a 400-mile march for racial and economic justice and for climate change. And that's going to end at Ted Cruz's house. Providing a little, so I know he wants to be a steward of that. So what do you wish to be a steward of? And where do you find the vital capacities to thrive with others? Those are the invitations. Interpret them in whichever way you want. And Bruce, over to you. Breakout rooms, 5 minutes, 4 people each. Don't be bashful, go into the flow.
And thank you, Arvind. I have that ready to go. And hold on, folks, we're about to go to the breakouts. Enjoy the conversation together.
Hey, Bruce, like you,
Yes.
I am so happy.
We have gone breakout together. I love it. It's all random, but it was meant to be.
It was. How nice. Well, thank you for all your help. And this is, it's such a, I mean, the intellect and the heart that one sees on this call is very noteworthy.
I would certainly agree. And when I first saw the text and the information about this event, there were so many things about this that resonated with me. I'm not a healthcare professional, but I actually spent 2 years as a senior advisor for process improvement to the head of the federal agency that deals with substance abuse prevention and treatment and behavioral health or mental health services, $3 billion a year in grants. And I learned so much about this and happened to be at the time that they were crafting the Affordable Care Act. And of course, they asked the one person who's not a health professional to write the agency's position paper on healthcare reform. So I got quite an education with that. And there's so much here about thriving and connecting and the dynamics of networks and where we find people. So the question, the framing question for the 4 of us here about what do we want to be stewards of? I know for me, my answer is I want to help people get to better outcomes together. And that's kind of the little phrase that I have used for a long time. There are ways that we can invite people and include people and facilitate dialogue, whether it's with liberating structures or strategic doing or any of these methodologies. And so to me, it's about finding those people through open invitation, inclusive and welcoming, not exclusive and judgmental. To me, those are critical factors.
Well said, Bruce. Bruce, may I request you for a small procedural task? I know you have the capability of broadcasting messages.
I think I do. Yes, I do. I have that window open right now.
So basically to say, and I think we've got a couple of minutes. I don't know how much time.
Oh, we've just gotten started. We can give them a little time if you like. I know we're close. We're theoretically close on time, but we're okay.
Okay, so I guess in the broadcast message, you could say that if each group could agree on well, they don't need to agree. If each group, if one representative from, or maybe the invitation is to everybody, if you wish to come back, go to chat and type out no more than a sentence, which you think is worth sharing with the larger group. We certainly want to invite that.
And I'm forgetting, what was the intention on the design board, again, using the facilitator's whisper to you here, was the intention on the design board to do a chat waterfall to capture those afterwards? That's what I thought.
That is correct.
That's what I thought. Very good. I will send that message right now.
Great. Thank you, Bruce. Pleasure.
Of course. And in the meantime, let's hear from Rosalie and Shingai.
Shingai, yeah. Rosalie and Shingai, if you are here, we'd love to hear from you. So Bruce, we are doing okay on time. I think we started about 5 or 7 minutes past the noon hour.
Yeah,
and so
we're doing great. We're doing great.
You're doing great on time, yeah.
And forgive me, I'm just typing in that message to get out to everybody.
Yes, please.
There's a limit on the size of these messages, it turns out.
Yeah, it's like a Twitter feed.
Yeah. So now I have to edit. Okay, there we go. There we go. Okay, broadcast is done.
Excellent.
Perfect. To our other two wonderful guests here with us right now, what do you make of all this? What's this whole idea of stewarding these kinds of conversations to get these kinds of objectives? What does that mean to both of you? There's no right or wrong answer, so just jump in with whatever you want to say.
Shingai and Rosalie. I wonder if they also were signed up through maybe their mobiles, or if they are already in, sometimes some of us have. So yeah, it seems our friends are silent and we feel their presence anyway.
We do indeed. And I see that Shingai is not muted. Rosalie is.
Right.
Don't be bashful if you'd like to chat and tell us a little bit about yourself. Doesn't have to necessarily be about stewarding these kinds of vital things for thriving, or you could talk about whatever you want to talk about. What's the weather like wherever you are in the world right now? I don't know. And Arvind, I don't know about you, but this is an awful lot like teaching my students online this last semester.
Yeah, some of my students are on this call. I mean, they're just. I finished my last class this morning.
Oh, I have my last final tonight.
Okay, got it.
We're getting there.
And Bruce, how are we doing on time?
We're going to give them. I think we're give them another minute or two, and
okay.
I'm gonna send a message out that we'll get them back in 2 minutes.
Okay.
And then we'll run a couple minutes over, like you said, but we started a little after the hour, so
okay,
it's all good. And there we go.
And Bruce, the class that you are teaching at Keene, it's a class on, is it social entrepreneurship?
It is. I've been teaching that for a couple of years, and I also teach every semester. I teach a class in negotiation, and I bring complexity concepts into. It's interesting. In 4 years, I have taught 6 different courses, and I'm always teaching one. I teach negotiation every semester, but 6 out of 7 semesters I've had different classes. And it's like, here's a 700-page textbook. You got 3 days. Go get ready. At any rate, yes, I teach commercial and social entrepreneurship and other kinds of marketing and management classes. And I bring complexity concepts to just about all of it. What has especially resonated with me is the field of social entrepreneurship. It didn't occur to me when I first began to look into the text and the literature and the work that complexity is a literal challenge and issue in that particular kind of entrepreneurship and work, both in terms of assessing the social landscape, the ecosystem of where the people in a community are having a social problem or need, whether it's homelessness, hunger, and whatever it is. And then at the other end of the line of work of the social venture, assessing impact is extremely difficult. We can count the number of people that we can bring into a shelter or feed, but the broader impact, I know one of the first case studies we do is a wonderful case study from India. It's a company called Akar Industries. And they were helping women get hygiene products at an affordable price in rural towns and villages all over India, where the dominant product was by Procter & Gamble and cost 40% more. Most women couldn't afford it. Well, there were secondary cons, so they used microfinancing to create jobs and small businesses, make these women the business owners and produce the stuff. So it created jobs and income. You could count that easily for outcomes and impact. But there were secondary impacts, which is that young girls who otherwise had to drop out of school because they couldn't be healthy or have the hygiene products they needed, now were able to stay in school and complete their education. So how do we assess that impact and value in a community and society? How do we assess happier families, happier towns, happier people, healthier people? So, and it turns out that there is a small but growing, and Heather, welcome. Hi, you've got about a minute to join us and jump in here.
Okay, thank you.
So
Good
what
to see
would you
you,
like
Heather.
to tell us about this concept? What do you want to steward?
Oh, I seem to have ended up with you rather than the main group, but what I want to steward is a change in the mindset. And I take issue with the assumption that we are by default overwhelmed by the broken systems. In every community, you find invisible heroes, and you find people who are dedicated to life and the leading causes of life. So I would say it's wrong to assume that we are all overwhelmed, or that those of us who work in some way as stewards are hampered by that perception. In our daily lives, we don't look to the big broken systems. We look to our neighbors.
I see we've got some folks jumping in with us, and I'm not sure quite if we're heading back to the main thing. But Arvind, I'm going to go ahead and close all the rooms and get us back at this point.
Please.
We just decided to join you.
Well, that's okay. We're joining everybody right now in 1 minute.
Awesome.
We couldn't wait to get back.
That's okay. We couldn't wait to see you. We were just hearing a comment from Heather that, that may be wrong to say that, that everything is kind of broken and that, this and that, and that there's always local champions, local heroes who are willing and able to steward stuff. And Heather, I certainly agree with that statement. I know from my learning from Deborah Fries and Margaret Wheatley, you may or may not be familiar with a book they wrote called Walk Out, Walk On.
Yes.
Wonderful stories, and the whole idea of asset-based development and what's called bricolage. What can I do with who and what I have, where I am, without any other help from anybody? And there are absolutely these champions and these heroes and these connectors and all of that for sure.
Well, and certainly in the lockdown, we are seeing people be enormously creative in
Very nice.
working around their desperation. Right across from me is a wonderful young family, 2 little kids. And as soon as lockdown began to hurt everyone economically, into the family came another family with 3 little kids. So now they cooperate, they live together, they share babysitting, they share the education because our schools are still closed. So they're being very, very creative in this period of hardship. So I wouldn't underestimate people at all.
And I just wanted to welcome everyone back to the main gathering, and we hope that you had really rich and vibrant and productive and generative dialogue. What you were just hearing was a quick comment from Heather in our little breakout as we came back with some thoughts about, you know, the idea that there are champions and heroes and connectors everywhere that we go in the world, and we can seek these local people. You know, you may know positive deviance. That's another kind of related practice and thought. And at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Arvind to ask us about doing the so-called chat waterfall of what you all were thinking about.
Well, something that I learned from Fisher, my mentor. So the invitation to you, if you wish to accept, is to go to chat and, you know, with your fingertips, perhaps type out a sentence which you think just absolutely needs to be shared with the group based on the conversation that you might have had. And we ask you to hold off on hitting return. You can hit return when we say hit return, maybe after a minute. I'll ding my Tingsha bells if I find them. And then we can see a waterfall. You know, we'll save the transcript and send it to you. So the invitation is yours, a minute to go to the chat function and share with us a sentence that you think others would find meaningful.
So type it in, but don't hit enter until Arvind gives you the signal.
Still on? Yeah, for a little bit longer.
Wrap it up in about 5 minutes. I know we started about 10 minutes late, so. Give another 10, 15 seconds.
So don't hit enter yet.
It's coming. The Tingsha bells are.
Oh, he's got the bells of destiny right there.
The nature of the bells is to ring.
So let's do it.
I love that.
Beautiful. All right. Oh, drowning. Completely drowning. Beautiful. Thank you. Well, as and you know, you may look at the chat waterfall. I wish we could read each one of them collectively, but perhaps we wouldn't do that. So, Bobby, how about we sort of close this, bring it together, and there's a beautiful statement that you made, which I think I'm going to use to invite you to close the session, and that is, how do we provide hospice to a dying culture and become midwives to a rising future?
Yeah, we like all good generative experiences, we didn't really know what would come up from this session, but it did seem likely that we would want to look at both the micro experiences in moments and the ways that we interact, and we've heard a lot about that in our own lives, as well as the grand stage of what's happening. Your question about, there is a pattern of working together now that isn't working well at all, having really dire consequences for ourselves and the planet, and yet there is still this hope. And so we thought about ending with sort of a story about three horizons, that there is, you look at what's popular now, the current norms and the mindsets and practices that uphold business as usual. That's dominated by a pattern of fragmentation, the illusion of separateness, the sort of comfort, if you will, with social division and the idea that everybody does their part and somehow it's going to work out well, but it never does, because everybody's externalizing the things that most matter to us. So that pattern of fragmentation is popular at the moment, but we could say it's misfit for purpose. It would have to decline for something new to rise. And so, the hospice to the dying culture is something about our tendencies toward fragmentation. The opposite extreme is this deep appreciation for interdependence, and all the way to what Jim was saying of, not just that we're interdependent and we could use that interdependence for good or ill, but interdependence like our lives are dependent on each other's. If we hurt another, we hurt ourselves. If we hurt our planet, we hurt ourselves. That level of interdependence probably leads the way to a viable future, but it's so outside the norm at the moment. It's not that it's not there, it's just deeply uncommon and marginalized. And we've heard this from centuries of indigenous communities that think we know how to live together in a finite world, but that's been displaced and disrespected and alienated. In between the two is, could be the path to bridge, take our individuality and forge it together through shared stewardship. If we could build that kind of strength, then maybe we could be a path toward the kind of interdependent future that we're looking for. And so this thought that we don't have to, dismiss everything about the world as it is to start anew, but we can remake it moment by moment, place by place, organization by organization, through the process of shared stewardship. And our organization has been thinking a lot about what does it take to strengthen shared stewardship. We listen really carefully to those that say they want to do it and are in the throes of trying to build the mindsets and skills. And the closest that we've come to, and the Plexus audience there is no better audience on the planet to see a crazy formula like this, but I hope you'll take it in the spirit with which we're offering it, which is, a little heuristic to think about the main elements of stewardship. Each of us as individuals and as organizations have this capacity. The question is, how deep is that practice? Are we really living up to the deep love that Mother Teresa was talking about, that Arvind called us into today's session with? That deep practice goes really, really deep, and most of us are only scratching the surface. And then it gets exponentially more powerful when animated by our strong relationships. Even one relationship can really expand into many more possibilities. And so deep practice powered by strong relationships, and then multiplied by our ability to fit into the conditions that we find ourselves. There's no such thing as enabling or opposing conditions. It's a question of how do we show up as stewards in those conditions and meet the complexity that we find. Sure, there's climate catastrophe and overt racism and the remnants of economic sort of shareholder capitalism. But all of those are for stewards to transform and meet in one way or another. And so those are the conditions that lead to the prospects of thriving together. This is a formula we're holding lightly, but it seems to work across scales. And it seems to be a kind of thing that each of us, can first and foremost look to ourselves and say, how am I acting like a steward? And then calling other people into this work as well. So we leave us all with this as a thought that we're beginning to question, can this be the way to build a skill that really all of us possess, but none of us can practice alone.
Beautiful. Bobby, it's music to listen to you. And it's highly inspirational and generative. We began with Mother Teresa. Why not end with His Holiness, the Dalai Lama? I was once in an audience with him when somebody asked him, how do we treat the other? No, I mean, it's a profound question. And he laughed, and his response was, what other?
Mm.
So
Beautiful.
thank you all.
Mm.
Thank you all for
That was good.
joining on this call
Oh,
from
man,
near and
so
far.
good,
And
so good.
oh,
Oh.
Nicole, look at that heart sign you've got.
Oh, yes, 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 yes. Love it.
So I think if we wish, we can open our microphones and have a symphony or a cacophony of greetings or, you know, shout outs. But I just want to thank our dear participants. Thank you, Bobby, for leading us, Gary, Dora, and Larry for deepening our conversation, Ella and Jim, for your deep reflections, and to each one of you for doing your small little thing with great love.
Thank you, Arvind.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
Arvind, and
Bye-bye.
everyone for doing this.
Great to be
So
Hey,
part.
grateful to see
Lydia,
you
good
all.
to
It is a
see
pleasure.
you.
So great.
Hey, Henry, looking good.
Thank you, everyone. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I feel very lucky to have been
Vicky,
a part of it. Thank
teacher of
you.
teachers.
I feel very grateful to have been asked to help you all out today.
Oh,
Bruce,
Bruce,
great work.
you were the master behind. I mean, you know, if we were puppets, you were the puppeteer. And
I don't know about that. I'm just a guy who knows maybe a tiny bit more than somebody else knows, and that seems to be enough. So,
Bobby, great job.
Great. Thank you all.
yeah, thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Prusha, for putting this together.
Bye-bye.
thank you, Prusha. Thank you,
Bye.
everyone. Arvind, everyone, all of our guests and speakers, thank you all for doing this. Wonderful
And
sharing
Corey,
insights and thoughts.
hey.
Thank you, Dr. Singhal. Thank you, Gary.
All right.
Thank you, everyone. It was an amazing session.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
Send
you. Bobby
the
again.
send the video. We might be able to find other
Bye-bye.
uses for that.
Yes. Bruce,
Thank
you
you.
did record it now, so we'd love to.
It is
have a
recording.
copy.
I'm going to stop the recording now, and then it's going to take a little while to do its thing and
Perfect.
resolute itself into the cloud or wherever it goes. I have no idea
Perfect.
where it goes.
Well, Arvind, safe travels tomorrow. I hope your mom makes it.